Eleanor stood in front of her floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the New York City skyline turn golden in the evening light. Tonight was the night. Her annual charity gala, the event that anyone wanted to attend. She smoothed down her silk dress and checked her reflection one more time. "Mrs. Hastings, the caterers just arrived," Rosa called from the hallway. Rosa had been her housekeeper for almost 8 years now. Reliable, quiet, and always knew exactly what Eleanor needed before she even asked for it. Eleanor turned around and noticed someone standing behind Rosa. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, with dark eyes and an uncomfortable expression on his face. He was holding a backpack and trying to make himself as small as possible. "Rosa, who is this?" Eleanor asked, her tone sharp. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hastings. This is my son, Miguel. His school let out early today and I had nobody to watch him. I know this is your big event, but I promise he'll stay out of the way. He'll just do his homework in the kitchen." Eleanor sighed. She didn't love the idea of having extra people around during her gala. But Rosa was too valuable to upset over something like this. Besides, it might even play well with her guests. She was always looking for ways to show how down-to-earth she was, how connected to regular people. "Fine, but he stays in the back. I don't want him wandering around when my guests arrive." Rosa nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Hastings, thank you so much." The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Guests began arriving at 7 sharp. Designer dresses, expensive cologne, laughter that sounded more like performance than genuine joy. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra. A touch on the arm here, a laugh at a joke there, always making sure everyone felt seen and important. By 8 o'clock, the penthouse was packed. Eleanor was in the middle of discussing her latest charitable project when she noticed something. Miguel was standing in the doorway of her music room, staring at her piano. The Steinway grand piano had cost her a fortune. She'd bought it 3 years ago after a particularly successful fundraiser. It sat in her music room like a piece of art, black and glossy and perfect. Eleanor herself couldn't play. She'd taken lessons as a child but never had the patience for it. The piano was more for show than anything else. "Excuse me for a moment," Eleanor said to the group around her. She walked over to Miguel, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The boy jumped when he heard her approach. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I was just looking. I'll go back to the kitchen." But Eleanor had just gotten an idea, a wonderful, spontaneous idea that would make this evening even more memorable for her guests. "Do you play?" she asked. Miguel looked confused. "Play what?" "The piano, dear. Do you know how to play?" His eyes widened. "A little bit. I mean, I've never played on anything like this before." "Perfect." Eleanor turned back to her guests and raised her voice slightly. "Everyone, I have a special treat for you tonight. This is Miguel, the son of my wonderful housekeeper, Rosa. He's going to play something for us on the piano." The crowd turned their attention toward them. Eleanor could see the polite smiles, the way they held their wine glasses just so. They were probably expecting some choppy version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This would be charming, endearing. It would show how generous she was, how she treated everyone equally. Miguel looked terrified. "Mrs. Hastings, I don't think—" "Oh, don't be modest," Eleanor said, gesturing toward the piano bench. "Go ahead. Play whatever you like." She could see Rosa in the back of the room, her face pale. The poor woman probably thought her son was about to embarrass himself in front of Manhattan's elite. Eleanor almost felt bad, but really, how could anything go wrong? At worst, the boy would play something simple, everyone would clap politely, and they'd move on. Miguel walked slowly to the piano. His hands were shaking as he sat down on the bench. He stared at the keys for a long moment, not touching them. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. Then his fingers touched the keys. What happened next? Eleanor would replay in her mind 1,000 times over the next few years. The sound that came from her piano was nothing like she'd expected. It wasn't choppy or hesitant or childish. It was powerful and complex and absolutely breathtaking. Miguel's hands moved across the keys like they'd been doing it his entire life. The music filled the entire penthouse, rising and falling, soft one moment and thunderous the next. Eleanor recognized the piece. Rachmaninoff, one of the most difficult composers in classical music. She knew this because she'd sat on the board of the New York Philharmonic for 2 years. The guests had stopped talking entirely. Wine glasses sat forgotten in hands. A woman near Eleanor had her mouth slightly open. Someone's phone, which had been about to ring, was quickly silenced. Miguel played for almost 6 minutes. His eyes were closed for most of it, his body swaying slightly with the music. When he finally played the last note, the sound hung in the air for a moment before fading away. Nobody moved. The silence stretched out, awkward and heavy. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. But it wasn't the polite, casual clapping Eleanor had expected. This was genuine, enthusiastic. Several people were actually standing up. Eleanor felt something uncomfortable twist in her stomach. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Miguel was supposed to be a cute distraction, a feel-good moment that made her look generous. He wasn't supposed to be better than the professional pianist she'd hired for last year's gala. Miguel stood up from the bench, his face flushed. He looked overwhelmed by the attention. Eleanor quickly moved forward, placing a hand on his shoulder and turning to address the crowd. "Wasn't that lovely?" she said, her voice bright and controlled. "Such a talented young man. Now let's move into the dining room. Dinner is about to be served." She steered the conversation away from Miguel as smoothly as she could, but for the rest of the evening she kept overhearing fragments of conversations. "Did you hear that boy play? Absolutely incredible. Where did he learn to play like that?" Eleanor smiled and nodded and played her role perfectly. But that uncomfortable feeling in her stomach never quite went away. After the last guest left around midnight, Eleanor kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. Rosa was in the kitchen, cleaning up with Miguel helping her. Eleanor walked to the kitchen doorway and watched them for a moment. Rosa was scrubbing a tray while Miguel dried dishes. They were talking quietly in Spanish, probably thinking she couldn't hear them. "You did good tonight, mijo," Rosa was saying. "I'm proud of you. Mom, that piano was incredible. I've never played on anything like that before. It was so different from—" He stopped talking when he noticed Eleanor standing there. "That was quite impressive," Eleanor said, her tone neutral. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Miguel looked at his mother, then back at Eleanor. "I taught myself mostly. Videos online. There's an old keyboard in the basement of our building. Some of the keys don't work, but I practice on it." Eleanor nodded slowly. A basement keyboard with broken keys. And this boy had just played Rachmaninoff in her penthouse. "Well," she said after a moment, "thank you for the performance. Rosa, make sure you lock up when you're done." She turned and walked back to her bedroom, leaving her empty wine glass on the counter. Behind her, she could hear Rosa telling Miguel to hurry up with the dishes. Eleanor stood in front of her windows again, looking out at the city lights. For some reason, she felt tired. More tired than she should after a successful evening. She told herself the gala had been perfect. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, she knew something had shifted. Something she wasn't quite ready to deal with yet. The phone call started the next morning. Eleanor was having her coffee and reading the newspaper when her cell phone rang. It was Patricia Chen, one of the guests from last night, a woman who sat on 3 different charity boards and had more money than she knew what to do with. "Eleanor, darling, I cannot stop thinking about that boy from last night, the one who played piano. Where on earth did you find him?" Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. "Oh, he's just Rosa's son, my housekeeper. Well, he's absolutely remarkable. Have you thought about sponsoring him? Getting him proper training? A talent like that shouldn't go to waste." After Patricia, there were 2 more calls, then an email, then a text message. Everyone wanted to know about Miguel. Everyone had suggestions. By noon, Eleanor had stopped answering. She sat in her living room, staring at the piano. The same piano that had caused all this fuss. She'd bought it to impress people, and now it had done exactly that, just not in the way she'd planned. Rosa arrived at 2 o'clock for her afternoon shift. Eleanor heard her keys in the door, heard her putting away her coat. "Everything normal, everything routine. Rosa, could you come here for a moment?" Eleanor called out. Rosa appeared in the doorway looking nervous. She always looked a bit nervous around Eleanor, even after 8 years. "Yes, Mrs. Hastings?" "Sit down. I want to talk about Miguel." Rosa sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm so sorry about last night. I know I shouldn't have brought him. It won't happen again." "That's not what I want to discuss." Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "Your son is very talented. Where does he take lessons?" Rosa's face changed. Something flickered across it. Hope, maybe, or fear. He doesn't take lessons, Mrs. Hastings. We can't afford them. He teaches himself everything from videos on his phone. I see. Eleanor paused. And what are his plans? For the future, I mean. Rosa was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. He got accepted to Juilliard, the pre-college program. They have classes on Saturdays for young musicians. Eleanor felt her eyebrows rise. Juilliard. That was serious. And we can't afford it. The tuition is $10,000 a year. Plus, he'd need a better instrument to practice on. And books. And transportation into the city every Saturday. Rosa's voice got quieter with each word. Miguel works after school at a grocery store. On weekends, he helps his uncle with construction. We need the money. $10,000. Eleanor spent more than that on a single dress for the Met Gala last year. She donated $50,000 to the Opera House just last month without blinking. Has he applied for scholarships? Eleanor asked. Everyone we could find. But there are so many talented kids and we don't have connections. We don't know the right people. Rosa looked down at her hands. I know my son is good, Mrs. Hastings. I've always known. But good isn't always enough, is it? Eleanor didn't answer. She was thinking, calculating. She had her philanthropic budget planned out for the entire year. The Children's Hospital was getting $100,000. The museum was getting $75,000. The scholarship fund at her old private school was getting $50,000. Everything was allocated, everything was decided, and there was another thing. Another uncomfortable thing she didn't want to admit, even to herself. If she helped Miguel, if she gave him money and opportunities, what would that look like? Would people think she was trying to take credit for his talent? Would they expect her to do the same for every talented kid who crossed her path? Mrs. Hastings? Rosa's voice pulled her back to the present. I need to think about this, Eleanor said. That's all for now. You can go back to work. Rosa stood up slowly. Eleanor could see the disappointment on her face, even though the woman was trying to hide it. Yes, Mrs. Hastings. Over the next few days, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. She'd wake up at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Miguel practicing on a broken keyboard in a basement somewhere. She'd be in meetings, nodding along to presentations while her mind wandered back to the image of his hands moving across her piano keys. She told herself she'd already done enough. She'd given Miguel a platform. She'd let him play for some of the most influential people in New York. That was more than most people would do. He was young and talented. He'd find his own way. Truly gifted people always did, didn't they? On Friday afternoon, Eleanor made her decision. She called Rosa into the living room again. This time, Miguel was with her. It was after school, and Rosa had picked him up because she needed to stay late to prepare for a dinner party Eleanor was hosting. I've been thinking about our conversation, Eleanor said. She looked at Miguel, who was standing next to his mother, his backpack still on his shoulders. You're very talented, but I have commitments. I've already allocated my charitable budget for the year, and I have to be fair to all the organizations I support. She saw Rosa's face fall, saw the way Miguel's shoulders slumped just slightly. However, Eleanor continued, I can write you a recommendation letter for scholarships. That should help. Thank you, Rosa said quietly, but her voice was flat. They both knew a letter wouldn't be enough. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest again. That same uncomfortable feeling from the night of the gala, but she pushed it away. She was being reasonable, practical. She couldn't help everyone. She had responsibilities. One more thing, Eleanor said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended. Rosa, I think it's best if you make other arrangements for Miguel after school. I can't have him here during work hours. It's too distracting. The words hung in the air. Rosa's face went very still. I understand, Mrs. Hastings. Good, you can go now. They left the room together, mother and son, and Eleanor heard the front door close a few minutes later. She sat alone in her living room, surrounded by expensive furniture and art that cost more than most people made in a year. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Found the number for the Children's Hospital. She'd increase her donation this year. Maybe add another $20,000. That would make her feel better. That would prove she was a good person, a generous person. But that night, lying in bed, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Miguel's face, the way his expression had changed when she told him she couldn't help. Not angry, not resentful, just resigned, Like he'd expected it all along, she told herself she'd made the right choice.
She had to maintain boundaries.
She had to be strategic with her philanthropy. Personal connections shouldn't matter. She gave to institutions, to programs, to causes, not to individuals. That's how it had to be. But in the darkness of her bedroom, with the city lights glowing through her windows, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. The kind of mistake that couldn't be undone. She heard Rosa's words echoing in her head. Good isn't always enough, is it? No, Eleanor thought. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes the people with the power to change that simply choose not to. She rolled over and closed her eyes, forcing herself to think about other things. Tomorrow's meetings. Next week's gala. Anything but a 16-year-old boy with calloused fingers and broken dreams, practicing on a keyboard in a basement where nobody important would ever hear him. By morning, Eleanor had almost convinced herself she'd done the right thing. Almost. 5 years disappeared like water through fingers. Eleanor's life continued exactly as it had before. More galas, more charity events, more photos in glossy magazines with headlines like Manhattan's Most Generous and The Woman Who Gives Back. Her penthouse got a renovation. Her art collection grew. She was invited to sit on 2 more boards. Rosa still worked for her. They'd settled into a new rhythm over the years, professional, distant. They never talked about Miguel anymore. Eleanor didn't ask, and Rosa didn't volunteer information. It was easier that way. On a cold Tuesday evening in November, Eleanor found herself getting ready for a concert at Carnegie Hall. Her friend Diane had invited her. Some new pianist everyone was talking about. Eleanor almost said no. She'd been to 100 classical concerts. They all blended together after a while, but Diane had insisted. You have to come, Eleanor. This young man is extraordinary. Everyone's saying he's going to be one of the greats. So Eleanor put on her black evening gown, her diamond earrings, and let her driver take her to Carnegie Hall. The venue was packed. She hadn't seen it this crowded in years. Usually classical concerts attracted an older crowd, but tonight there were young people everywhere. Students with backpacks, couples on dates. The energy felt different. Eleanor found her seat in the orchestra section. Premium tickets, of course. She glanced at the program in her lap. The pianist's name was printed in bold letters across the front, but she didn't recognize it. The bio inside was more interesting. Self-taught prodigy takes classical world by storm, it read. After working multiple jobs to put himself through community college, Miguel Santos earned a full scholarship to the Vienna Conservatory, where he studied under some of Europe's most renowned teachers. Now at just 21 years old, he returns to New York for his Carnegie Hall debut. Eleanor's hands went cold. The program slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Someone next to her picked it up and handed it back to her, but she barely noticed. Miguel Santos, Rosa's son, the boy who'd played at her penthouse 5 years ago. The lights dimmed before she could fully process what was happening. The crowd went silent. A spotlight hit the stage and a young man walked out from the wings. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. It was definitely Miguel. But he'd changed. He was taller now, more confident. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was styled, but it was his face that struck her most. There was something different in his expression, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The audience applauded as he approached the piano. He bowed slightly, then sat down at the bench. For a moment he simply sat there, his hands resting on his knees, gathering himself. The silence stretched out. Then he began to play. Eleanor had heard professional pianists before. Many of them. Some of the best in the world. But this was something else entirely. Miguel didn't just play the notes. He lived inside the music. Every phrase felt like a conversation, like he was telling a story that only he knew how to tell. She watched his hands move across the keys. The same hands she'd seen 5 years ago. But now they moved with even more certainty, more purpose. He played for 45 minutes straight. 3 different pieces, each more complex than the last. When he finished the final note, the entire hall erupted. People jumped to their feet. The applause was deafening. Eleanor remained frozen in her seat, unable to move. Around her, everyone was standing, cheering, some people even crying. Miguel stood and bowed, once, twice, 3 times. The applause didn't stop. He smiled, and Eleanor could see he was trying not to cry himself. This was his moment, the moment he'd worked for, the moment that almost didn't happen. Eventually, the applause faded. The crowd began to file out, still buzzing with excitement. Eleanor heard fragments of conversations around her. Did you hear he worked 3 jobs to afford college? Self-taught until he was 19. Can you believe it? They're saying he might be the best pianist of his generation. Eleanor sat in her seat even after most people had left. Diane appeared beside her. Wasn't he incredible? Are you coming to the reception? I have passes. Reception? Eleanor's voice sounded far away. Yes, there's a small gathering backstage. For donors and special guests. Come on, it'll be fun. Eleanor should have said no. Should have gone home. But something pulled her forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe she just needed to see him up close to confirm that this was real. The backstage area was crowded with well-dressed people holding champagne glasses. Eleanor followed Diane through the crowd, her heart pounding. And then she saw him. Miguel was standing near the back, surrounded by admirers. He was smiling, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. He looked happy, truly happy. Eleanor started moving toward him before she could stop herself. She pushed through the crowd, her mind racing with what she'd say. Congratulations, I always knew you'd make it. I'm so proud of you. Miguel looked up just as she reached him. Their eyes met. His smile disappeared instantly. Not dramatically. Not angrily. It just faded, like someone had flipped a switch. He recognized her immediately. Mrs. Hastings, he said. His voice was polite but cool. Miguel, Eleanor said, her voice too loud, too eager. That was extraordinary. Just extraordinary. I'm so proud of you. I always knew you had this in you. Something flickered across Miguel's face. He glanced past her, and Eleanor turned to see Rosa standing a few feet away. Her old housekeeper looked different too. She was wearing a nice dress, her hair done up. She looked proud. And when she met Eleanor's eyes, there was something else there. Something sad and knowing. Thank you for coming, Miguel said, turning back to Eleanor. I appreciate it. I had no idea you'd accomplished so much, Eleanor continued, unable to stop talking. If I'd known, I would have. I've been following your career, of course. The lie hung in the air between them. They both knew it was a lie. Mrs. Hastings, Miguel said quietly. I have other guests I need to greet. Thank you for coming tonight. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Eleanor felt her face flush. Of course. But perhaps we could talk sometime, catch up? I'd love to hear about your journey, and I'm always looking for talented artists to support. My manager handles all sponsorship inquiries, Miguel said. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. You can contact him if you'd like to discuss supporting the arts. The card felt heavy in Eleanor's hand, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Miguel, Eleanor started, but she didn't know how to finish the sentence. Before she could figure it out, someone else called Miguel's name. A man in an expensive suit, probably someone important from the music world. Miguel excused himself and walked away, Rosa following behind him. Eleanor stood alone in the crowded room, holding a business card, feeling like she'd been slapped. Diane appeared at her elbow. You know him? I used to, Eleanor said quietly. A long time ago. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. Miguel's face when he saw her, the coldness in his polite words, Rosa's sad, knowing look. She got up and walked to her music room. The Steinway was still there, glossy and perfect and barely used. She sat down on the bench and touched the keys. They felt cold under her fingers. 5 years ago, a boy with extraordinary talent had played this piano, and she'd sent him away. She'd had the power to change his life with what would have been pocket change to her. And she'd chosen not to. She'd told herself it was about being fair, about having boundaries, about being strategic. But sitting there in the darkness, Eleanor finally admitted the truth to herself. She hadn't helped Miguel because seeing his talent had made her uncomfortable. It had threatened the careful world she'd built, where she was the generous one, the important one, the one who decided who deserved help. Miguel had made it anyway, without her, despite her, and now he was exactly where he deserved to be. But Eleanor knew she'd never forget the way he'd looked at her tonight. Not with anger, not with resentment, just with the quiet understanding of someone who'd learned a hard lesson about how the world really works. She closed the piano and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come, and when morning arrived, Eleanor still felt the weight of that business card in her hand, a reminder of everything she'd lost by being too afraid to truly see what was right in front of her. Eleanor didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Instead, she told her driver to circle the block while she sat in the back seat, her mind racing. The reception was still going on inside Carnegie Hall. Through the lit windows, she could see silhouettes of people laughing, celebrating, drinking champagne. She thought about Miguel's face. The way he'd handed her that business card, like she was just another wealthy person trying to claim a connection to his success now that it was convenient. "Mrs. Hastings?" her driver asked. "Should I take you home?" "No," Eleanor said. "Wait here." She got out of the car and walked back toward the entrance. Her heels clicked on the pavement. The night air was cold and she pulled her coat tighter. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew she couldn't leave things the way they were. The security guard at the stage door recognized her from earlier and let her back in. The reception had thinned out. Only about 20 people remained, mostly musicians and close friends. Miguel was sitting on a couch in the corner, talking with Rosa and an older man Eleanor didn't recognize. Eleanor's courage almost failed her. But she'd come this far. She crossed the room, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Miguel," she said. "Please, I need to talk to you." Miguel looked up. So did Rosa. The older man excused himself and walked away, sensing the tension. "Mrs. Hastings, I really don't think—" Miguel started. 5 minutes, Eleanor interrupted. "That's all I'm asking." 5 minutes. Rosa put her hand on Miguel's arm. They exchanged a look. Some silent conversation Eleanor wasn't part of. Finally, Miguel nodded. "Okay, 5 minutes." They moved to a quieter corner away from the remaining guests. Rosa stayed close, standing a few feet away. She wasn't going to leave her son alone with Eleanor. Eleanor didn't blame her. "I want to explain," Eleanor said, "about 5 years ago. About why I didn't help you." "You don't owe me an explanation," Miguel said. His voice was calm, too calm. "You didn't owe me anything then and you don't owe me anything now. But I want to explain anyway." Eleanor took a breath. "After that night at my penthouse, I got so many calls. People asking about you. Telling me I should sponsor you. And I thought about it. I really did. But then I started making excuses. I told myself I had budget commitments, that I had to be fair to all the organizations I supported, that personal connections shouldn't influence my charitable decisions." Miguel listened without interrupting. His face was unreadable. "But the truth is," Eleanor continued, and her voice cracked slightly, "the truth is that helping you scared me. When you played that night, you were better than the professional pianist I'd hired the year before. You were better than most of the musicians I'd heard at concerts, and you taught yourself on a broken keyboard in a basement." "I don't understand," Miguel said. "Why would that scare you?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, the hands that had written checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars to museums and hospitals and schools, hands that had never gotten dirty, never struggled. "Because if I helped you, it would mean admitting something I didn't want to admit. That my whole approach to charity was wrong. I gave money to feel good about myself, to see my name on plaques, to have people thank me at galas. But you didn't need my validation. You just needed practical help. And giving you that help wouldn't have gotten me anything in return except knowing I'd done the right thing." The words hung in the air. Eleanor felt exposed, like she'd peeled back her own skin. "You were afraid I'd make you look bad," Miguel said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No." "Yes. Maybe." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know. I just know that when I looked at you, I saw someone who was going to succeed or fail entirely on their own merit, and that terrified me, because it meant that everything I'd built, all my philanthropy, all my charitable work, it was just a performance. You were real. Your talent was real. Your struggle was real, and I couldn't handle that." Rosa stepped closer. "Mrs. Hastings, what do you want from us?" Eleanor looked at Rosa. Really looked at her. This woman had cleaned her house for 8 years, had listened to her complaints about trivial things, had smiled and nodded and never once made Eleanor feel bad about her privilege. And Eleanor had known her son was special, had known he needed help and had sent them both away. "I don't want anything," Eleanor said. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong. That I'm sorry, and that I've spent 5 years trying to convince myself I made the right decision, but I didn't. I was selfish and cowardly, and you both deserved better." Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't the money. The money was hard. I worked at a grocery store from 4 to 10 every weeknight. Weekends, I did construction with my uncle. I slept maybe 5 hours a night for 3 years." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "But the hardest part," Miguel continued, "was that for a few minutes that night, I let myself hope. When you asked me to play, when everyone applauded, when people came up to me after and said I was talented, I thought maybe things were going to change. Maybe someone would see me. Really see me." "Miguel," Eleanor whispered, "and then you told my mom not to bring me back to your house anymore. You made it clear that I was a distraction, an inconvenience. And I realized that to you, I was just entertainment. A feel-good story you could tell at dinner parties. The housekeeper's talented son who played piano at your gala that one time." Eleanor couldn't speak. Tears were running down her face now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "But you know what?" Miguel's voice softened slightly. "You did teach me something important. You taught me that I couldn't wait for someone to save me, that I had to save myself. Every time I wanted to quit, every time I was so tired I could barely stand, I remembered that night. I remembered how it felt to be dismissed by someone who had the power to help, but chose not to. I'm so sorry," Eleanor said. It felt inadequate, worthless, but it was all she had. "I believe you," Miguel said, "and I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something. You didn't ruin my life by not helping me. I made it anyway. But you need to understand that your charity isn't just about writing checks. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, not as props in your story, but as human beings with their own stories." Rosa moved to stand beside her son. She looked at Eleanor with an expression that was hard to read. Not quite forgiveness, not quite anger. Something in between. "Mrs. Hastings," Rosa said, "I stopped working for you 6 months ago. Miguel got his first big contract, and he told me I didn't have to clean houses anymore. But I didn't tell you because I didn't want to have this conversation. I didn't want to relive that time." Eleanor nodded. "I didn't even notice you were gone. I have a new housekeeper now." "I know," Rosa said. "Her name is Carmen. She has a daughter who wants to be a doctor but can't afford college. I hope you see her. I hope you really see her. Before it's too late." The words hit Eleanor like a punch to the stomach. Another person. Another chance. Another opportunity to be better. "I will," Eleanor said. "I promise I will." Miguel stood up. "I need to get back to my guests. Thank you for apologizing. That took courage. But Mrs. Hastings, I want you to understand something. I don't forgive you because I'm not sure you understand what you're asking forgiveness for. You didn't just refuse to help one kid. You refused to see me as a person, as someone who mattered. And until you really understand that, an apology doesn't mean much." He walked away, Rosa following him. Eleanor stood alone in the corner of the room, watching them leave. She felt hollow, empty, but also strangely more awake than she'd felt in years. She left Carnegie Hall and got back in her car. As they drove through the Manhattan streets, Eleanor looked out at the city. Millions of people. Thousands of stories. How many had she missed because she was too busy performing her own? When she got home, she didn't go to bed. Instead, she went to her office and opened her laptop. She pulled up her household files and found Carmen's employment information. Carmen Rodriguez, age 38. Daughter named Isabella, 16 years old. Eleanor stared at the screen for a long time. Then she started typing an email. Not to Carmen, but to herself. A reminder, a promise, a chance to be different. She didn't know if she could change. Didn't know if one conversation with Miguel would be enough to undo years of privilege and blindness. But she knew she had to try. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, but because Miguel was right. Charity wasn't about writing checks. It was about seeing people. And Eleanor was tired of being blind. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk until the sky started turning gray, thinking about everything Miguel had said. About being seen, about being real, about the difference between performing charity and actually caring about people. When Carmen arrived for work the next morning, Eleanor was waiting in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Hastings?" Carmen looked confused. In the 6 months she'd worked there, Eleanor had barely spoken to her beyond giving"Sit down, please," Eleanor said. "I want to talk to you." Carmen sat slowly like she was worried this was some kind of trap. Eleanor pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. Rosa told me you have a daughter. Isabella, she's 16. Carmen's face changed, became guarded. Yes, is there a problem? No problem. I just realized I've never asked you about her. About your life. I'd like to know. For the next hour, Carmen talked, at first hesitantly, then more freely. She told Eleanor about Isabella, who wanted to be a doctor, who volunteered at a free clinic in their neighborhood, who had straight A's but no way to pay for college, who studied by flashlight after Carmen went to bed because they shared a one-bedroom apartment, and Carmen needed the main room for sleeping before her early shifts. Eleanor listened. Really listened, not thinking about what she'd say next or how this would make her look. Just listening. How much does she need? Eleanor asked when Carmen finished. For college, Carmen shook her head quickly. Mrs. Hastings, I wasn't telling you this to ask for money. I know. But I'm asking anyway, how much? With room and board, books, everything? Carmen's voice was shaking. Maybe $60,000 a year. But that's impossible. We're looking at community college and student loans and… What if it wasn't impossible? Eleanor interrupted. What if someone paid for it? Carmen stared at her. I don't understand. I want to help Isabella. Full scholarship. All 4 years. No strings attached. No publicity. No plaques with my name on them. Just help. Tears started running down Carmen's face. Why would you do this? Eleanor thought about how to answer. She could tell Carmen about Miguel, about the lesson she'd learned, about trying to be better. But none of that mattered to Carmen. What mattered was her daughter. Because Isabella deserves a chance, Eleanor said simply. And because I can help, so I should. Carmen covered her face with her hands and cried. Eleanor sat there feeling uncomfortable and helpless and more human than she'd felt in years. But Eleanor didn't stop there. Over the next few months, she started changing everything about how she approached her wealth. She didn't announce it. Didn't call a press conference. She just quietly started doing things differently. She reached out to her accountant and lawyer, asked them to help her set up a new kind of foundation. One that helped individual people, not just institutions. One that specifically looked for talented young people from working-class families. Students who needed help but didn't have connections or fancy applications. She called it the Unseen Voices Foundation. No gala launch. No celebrity endorsements. Just a simple website with an application form and a promise to help 20 students a year with full scholarships and mentorship. Eleanor stopped attending so many charity events. Stopped posing for photos with oversized checks. Stopped seeking recognition for her donations. Some of her society friends thought she was having a breakdown. They'd call and ask if everything was okay. Why wasn't she at this gala or that fundraiser? I'm fine, Eleanor would tell them. I'm just trying something different. What she didn't tell them was that she'd started volunteering. Actually volunteering, not just writing checks. She tutored at a community center in Queens every Thursday evening, helped teenagers with their college applications. Most of them had no idea who she was or how much money she had. To them, she was just Mrs. Hastings, the lady who was pretty good at explaining essay structure. She sold the Steinway piano. It felt right somehow. She donated the money to a program that provided instruments to music students who couldn't afford them. She wondered if Miguel would ever hear about it and know why she'd done it. 2 years passed. Eleanor's life looked completely different now. Smaller in some ways. She went to fewer parties, appeared in fewer magazines, but bigger in the ways that mattered. She knew the names of the students she helped, knew their dreams, their struggles, their victories. Isabella was thriving at college. Carmen sent Eleanor photos sometimes. Isabella in her dorm room. Isabella at her first anatomy class. Isabella smiling so wide her face looked like it might split. Eleanor kept the photos in a drawer in her desk, looked at them when she was having a hard day. Then one spring afternoon, Eleanor saw an advertisement for a concert. Miguel Santos was performing again. This time at a smaller venue, a benefit concert for music education programs in underserved communities. Eleanor bought a ticket in the back row. She didn't want to intrude, didn't want to make the evening about her. She just wanted to hear him play again. The concert was beautiful. Miguel had somehow gotten even better over the past 2 years. During the intermission, Eleanor stayed in her seat while everyone else went to the lobby. She was about to leave when someone sat down next to her. It was Rosa. Mrs. Hastings. Rosa said. Not coldly, but not warmly either. Just stating a fact. Rosa, it's good to see you. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Rosa said, Carmen told me what you did for Isabella. Eleanor nodded. How is she doing? She's doing wonderfully. She called Carmen last week crying because she got accepted to a summer research program at Johns Hopkins. Rosa paused. That was a good thing you did. It was the right thing. I should have done it sooner. Yes, Rosa agreed. You should have. She didn't sugarcoat it. But you did it eventually. That counts for something. The lights dimmed, signaling the second half was about to start. Rosa stood up to return to her seat, but she paused. Miguel knows you're here. He saw you come in. Eleanor's heart jumped. He did? He's been following your foundation. He knows what you've been doing. He doesn't talk about it, but he knows. Rosa looked at Eleanor carefully. He's still hurt. That doesn't just go away. But he told me once that hurt can either make you bitter or make you better. He chose better. And it looks like maybe you did too. Rosa walked back to her seat. Eleanor sat there, her throat tight, her eyes burning. The second half of the concert began. Miguel played 3 more pieces, each one more stunning than the last. For the final piece, he stood up and spoke to the audience. This last piece is dedicated to everyone who's ever practiced on a broken keyboard in a basement, to everyone who's ever been told they're not worth the investment, to everyone who kept going anyway. He paused. And to the people who learned to see them. Eleanor didn't know if he meant her. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Miguel was right. Real charity wasn't about recognition or tax deductions or having your name on a building. It was about seeing people, truly seeing them, their potential, their humanity, their worth. As Miguel's hands moved across the keys, Eleanor closed her eyes and listened. The music filled the concert hall, reaching every corner, touching every person, beautiful and powerful and free. When the concert ended, Eleanor didn't try to go backstage. She didn't seek out Miguel or Rosa. She simply walked out into the spring evening, feeling the cool air on her face. Her phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. A photo of her in a white coat at the hospital where she was volunteering. The message read, First day shadowing a doctor. Thank you for making this possible. Eleanor smiled and texted back, You made it possible. I just helped clear the path. She walked home slowly, thinking about the past 2 years. About how much had changed. About how much she'd changed. She wasn't perfect. She still had moments where she fell back into old patterns. Still sometimes thought about recognition and status. But now she caught herself. Corrected course. Remembered what mattered. She thought about Miguel's dedication, to everyone who kept going anyway, to the people who learned to see them. Eleanor had learned to see, finally. And in doing so, she'd discovered something unexpected. The less she performed charity, the more she actually cared. The less recognition she sought, the more meaningful her life became. The less she thought about herself, the more human she felt. It wasn't redemption exactly. Some things couldn't be undone. Some mistakes left permanent marks. But it was growth, change, a better path forward. And sometimes, Eleanor thought as she reached her building and looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights, sometimes that's enough. Not perfect, not painless, but enough. She went inside and pulled out her laptop. 20 new applications to the Unseen Voices Foundation were waiting for review. 20 more young people hoping someone would see them, would believe in them, would help clear the path so they could run. Eleanor started reading the first application, a 17-year-old boy who wanted to study engineering but was working nights at a warehouse to help his family. She made a note to schedule an interview. There was so much work to do, so many people to see, so many voices waiting to be heard. Eleanor smiled and kept reading. This was what mattered. This was real. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was finally doing something that would last longer than a plaque on a wall or a photo in a magazine. She was helping people become who they were meant to be, and in doing so, she was becoming who she was meant to be too.